My dad, Larry Linton, the only true servant leader willing to stand in the arena and fight for your freedoms.
Larry is a man of God, and he will move heaven and earth to protect the people in district.
Too many elected politicians act like chameleons.
My name's Mike. I'm Larry's neighbor. I bought the house behind him. I trust Larry to give me an honest answer.
And what's important to me is faith, family, and my freedom. And I believe these values are also held by Larry Linton.
More important than ever, I believe, in our lifetime to really stand up and fight for what's right. And Larry's doing that, and I'm in support of it.
We need to replace career politicians in Nashville with leaders willing to stand for what is right, even if it's not popular. People who feel a calling and are not looking to make a profession out of it.
You're not going to find a more honest, straightforward, and passionate individual, I don't believe. Larry is what you see is what you get. He's honest.
Listen, if you are looking for a true conservative who's passionate about the state of Tennessee, the people that live in it, and wanting to make a difference in a meaningful way, Larry's your guy.
Good Monday morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the show will have a special guest with us. One of the most consistent conservative representatives in the Tennessee House of Representatives joins the show today and next week as well for a two-part discussion. Representative Chris Todd, out of House District 73, which is part of Madison County, is our guest, and we will be discussing what servant leadership means to him, as well as some other topics. For just a quick biography for Representative Todd, he's a small business owner out there in West Tennessee. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree from Union University. Also, he is a state certified hydrologic professional and received his international certification in erosion and sediment control. Representative Todd is married to his wonderful wife, Melissa, and they are the parents of 3 children. Representative Todd is one of the very few members of the General Assembly that I've reached out to for an appearance on the show so far, and that is because of his conservative credentials. Now, we may not agree on 100% of the issues facing our fellow Tennesseans today, but rest assured, Representative Todd approaches each piece of legislation and policy with a correct worldview, as you will all see during the interview. We talked for nearly an hour, and that is why I'm breaking this episode into 2 separate shows. If you are a subscriber to Tennessee Conservative News and receive their annual Rhino Report, you will know that in the latest report, Chris Todd was the prime House sponsor for a great piece of conservative legislation, House Bill 2882. That bill will require that beginning with the 2025-2026 school year, each local education agency and public charter school will provide students with age-appropriate and grade-appropriate instruction on firearm safety. Now, this bill was passed despite being introduced under the shadow of Church Pew Lee's special red flag law session that was convened in the wake of the transgender massacre of 6 people at the Covenant School in Nashville last year. Talk about standing firm, folks. This guy did it. Now, this past week has been a very uneventful one for me. It is quite the change of pace from the previous 6 months, where I would spend a significant amount of the 3 weeks of time I would be at home after working out of state with my clients doing this campaign stuff. Now, a fellow could get quite used to spending this much time with his family during their time off. Later this morning, after the show has been released, I have my orthopedic consult for my left knee. I believe that I told the audience about injuring my knee while working in Midland, Texas the first week of the year. Well, I finally had an MRI on the knee on the 1st of August, and then my VA doctor went over the results with me a couple of weeks ago. It turns out that the knee is worse off than I imagined. I thought it was only a tear in the meniscus. Turns out it was the tear, a cyst on my ACL, and a Baker cyst at the back of the knee. It's definitely going to require surgery, and that's what I'll be discussing with the doctor later this morning. As I know more about that schedule, I'll let you all know as well. Oh, there is still no winner yet on what genre of books the Nazis were famous for burning. I did have to let one listener know what genre they were after several attempts at guessing by the listener, but that was probably due to the way I asked the question. So to clarify, I'm looking for the specific genre of books, not any individual authors or the ethnicity of the authors or the political leaning of the authors, nor am I referring to a political topic as the genre, just the genre. Like science fiction is a genre or history is a genre. I'm looking for the genre of the books the Nazis are famous for burning. Now, with a recap complete, let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty Leadership and Lies podcast, where Representative Chris Todd and I will discuss the topic of servant leadership. And we'll get into a couple other things. So let's take a stand in the arena together again this week, folks, and get on with the show. Welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. On this show, we will discuss the assaults on our liberty by the very institution we the people created to secure our liberty. We will also compare and contrast the actions of people in leadership positions to the servant leadership that is needed to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Additionally, we will break down the many lies that elected and unelected officials in government and media spin every day in order to secure for themselves positions of power and influence that are antithetical to the system of government our founding fathers created and passed down to us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we have a special guest on the program. It's Representative Chris Todd from out in the West Tennessee. He's one of the most staunchest conservatives in our General Assembly. We're going to talk to him today about the topic of leadership. So welcome, Representative Todd. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Good to be with you, Larry.
Thank you for coming on again. How are things going out there in West Tennessee? The primary's over, and I understand that was you thought it was going to be closer than it was, but it ended up you prevailing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I ended up with a little over 2-1 margin and was very, very surprised at that and very pleased. And I don't have a general challenger in November, so it's home free at this point. So just as long as I vote for myself, I guess I'll get it.
As long as you get that one, right?
That's right. That's right.
Now you got your bona fides out of the way because you voted in the primary, right?
Right, right. So, well, and I was very not only surprised, but honored and very humbled by the turnout and the number of folks that decided that I needed another term and in a really overwhelming way. So very humbled by that.
What was the percentage turnout in your district?
It, turnout, I don't remember that I saw a final number on that. I've actually been wondering, and I'm not, I just haven't stopped to ask anybody, but I think I had the impression it was somewhere in the 12 to 14%.
Okay, a little bit better than House District 12. We had about 10% here. As you know, I was a candidate in that election, and but the primary participation rates they're slowly going downhill. And again, that's a topic for another day on the leadership of the local or not just Sevier County, but all the county Republican parties for not being active in promoting our brand. I don't know what the problem with that is, but our brand, I think, is pretty good. It's Constitution and country. And and then going down that road of the Constitution, and I think like you believe probably like I do that our framers, when they wrote that thing, most of them, or all but one, were actually deists that they believe in God the creator, and most of them were Bible believing Christians. And that document or that book laid the foundation for the way our government was supposed to be set up and is supposed to be running. And I think that the idea of the people they were looking to serve their country were servant leaders. So what are your thoughts on that?
I would totally agree. There's no question that's what they were looking for, the way they set it up. And it's disheartening to think about, especially the last 4 to 6 decades and how that has been eroded, among a lot of other things. Not only have we eroded that principle of servant leadership from the standpoint of a part-time legislature, but we've also eroded the principles and literally the language of the Constitution that limits the federal government and their reach. And they have been involved in a tremendous overreach for the last number of decades. And unfortunately, our predecessors have allowed that to happen. And I think it's up to us to start the progress back to where the states have the majority of the power. I mean, when you come down to it, the founders recognized this, that the states created the federal government. The states also created the cities and counties. So the state government is the center of all government, and it should be. You know, we're closest to the people in a broad sense from the standpoint of the makeup and flavor of a state. Unlike our federal government, which is, you know, trying to be representative of all states, I guess you would say. And that has really hurt us, I think, in so many ways. And it's really ironic how many ways I learn about almost on a monthly basis, sometimes more frequent than that. For example, EPA. You know, we find, matter of fact, I've made a career out of EPA regulations, more or less. I mean, even though our state administers those, most of those, the EPA has handed many of those basic principles down and minimum standards down in so many ways. But I'm finding out just how onerous they are when it comes to things like emission standards. EPA comes up with some magic number of miles per gallon target that a company should have. And if you don't meet that target, you get penalized. And policies that we on a state basis, on a state level, may implement can actually affect those sales models and those miles per gallon targets. I learned that in the last couple of years when we were looking at adding a fee to electric vehicle registration for them to be able to pay for the roads that they're running on, where the rest of us pay it in gas tax. EVs would not pay anything. And so as we went through that discussion, I learned from a local manufacturer here, Toyota, that that is the case, in fact. And if we included hybrids, for example, in that at too high of a level, it would change their sales model and they literally would have problems with EPA. So the federal overreach is tremendous all around us. And it is quite disheartening to see just how deep that goes, unfortunately.
Right. I regularly point out to my listeners that there is not an aspect of an everyday American's life now that the federal government doesn't touch. From turning on the light switch when you wake up in the morning to running the water, brushing your teeth, taking a shower, driving on the roads, working in an office or wherever you work, and then coming back home and eating dinner and going to bed. The federal government touches every part of that your American life now. And that was definitely not the design of the Constitution. With you talked about where the states, yeah, they created it. The federal government's not a party to the Constitution; it's a product of it. And state sovereignty has been eroded, and I think it can appear to be nefarious. And I believe it started with the 16th Amendment when the government decided to do the constitutional workaround against the taxes, income taxes, so they can now get first cut of every American's check before any American sees it. And then they further eroded by weakening state sovereignty by implementing the 17th Amendment. Because the bicameral Congress, federal Congress, was supposed to be the House representing the people and the Senate representing the states. And then when you started to directly elect senators, what you just got was just super representatives, right? Because now the state's interests are not represented there anymore.
I would have to agree with you. I think that is probably a likely starting point. And then it's been on steroids, to some degree ever since.
Right. And you could see you could track the participation rate in our elections started its decline right around the passage of those two amendments. Because, I mean, now everyday Americans are like, well, it doesn't matter what I can do because the federal government's just going to say, no, you can't. They're going to have some bureaucratic agency come up with a rule that says, hey, you got to follow our rules. And Congress be damned, in other words.
Right.
So that was I think the Chevron deference, well, the recent Supreme Court decision is going to go a long way to fixing that.
It will help.
But I often tell my audience, though, if you live by the courts, you're going to die by the courts. And I think it was Justice Sotomayor a couple years ago admitted in a recording that the Supreme Court has taken on extra constitutional outside Article 3 authorities by declaring that they are the final arbiters of national, but they're not. They're only supposed to decide the cases in front of them, not have national implications. So, but anyways, I can go on and on and on. And I'm sure, being of the conservative mindset, we both believe in the limited government and the state sovereignty issues here.
But all of these things are related. You're exactly right. You can't almost get off topic because everything is so interrelated.
Absolutely. So how would you define servant leadership, though? And what do you think? What do you believe? Why is it that important in the political office?
I think defining it, I would say, is where an individual decides to put at least a portion of their life kind of on hold, unfortunately, to serve something of a greater good, something bigger than themselves. And in this case, government, like in the legislature, for example, I think, and we have other folks doing that as well, commissioners and others that are appointees for a certain period of time to serve in different roles in our government. So they almost put their regular life on hold, at least a certain degree of it, while they do that job, that task for 2 years or 4 years or 8 years, whatever it might be. And they obviously through that, they're sacrificing a lot of things. Their families sacrifice a lot of things. There's a lot of time that you'll never get back. But knowing that it is for the greater good and that our society depends on those servant leaders, it's something that fortunately folks still sign up for, even with all the negatives that come with it from the standpoint of attacks, and especially in our case, the left just making things up on a daily basis and creating what they consider their own truth, which you and I both know is singular. There's only one truth, and in a given situation, not your truth or my truth, but they like to believe they can own their own truth. So I think that's probably one of the main things about servant leadership that I would recognize, and people do that for certain periods of time. I've known some representatives that literally served 2 years, and that was what they felt like they could contribute. Others 4 years or 6 years, and then others 24 years. So it's on an individual basis of how much and how long they want to put themselves out for that. And I would hope that one of these days when my time comes to be in that decision part of my career, that it would be very clear to me it's time for you to step down. This is this is no longer something that you're going to be best at or the best choice for your constituents in that office that you're holding, whatever that is at the moment.
Well, hopefully it's not anytime soon, because there's a lot of commies that still need battling, and we need good conservative warriors up there to do that.
We do. We certainly do, and folks of the right temperament. And if you're familiar with the legislature at all, you know how diverse and varied in talents and mindsets and experiences we are. And that was one of the neatest things that I discovered in getting elected 6 years ago, is that it's really a very unique mixture of people that would represent a community. And in our case, in the House, roughly 70,000 people. And we each bring different things, different flavors, different experiences, different sets of wisdom, I guess you might say, and life experiences that help in crafting everything we do, policies and certainly ultimately legislation.
Right. I got to experience the same, when on my warships throughout my time in the Navy. You would get you got the whole macrocosm of the United States focused into a microcosm of different people, different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences, all working towards one common goal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a great time. And I understand that not serving in the General Assembly anymore. I made a promise to my wife if I lost this primary, I was not going to ever run again. It's a cost. There is a toll that goes on the family, especially. My wife is my biggest cheerleader, but
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want to go. I think she doesn't want to see me go through it anymore. It's nothing for her, but not me. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I can see that, and it's a toll on her for sure. I know. I see it as well.
so your wife's has she given you a time frame or a limit or no? That's good. Yeah.
No, she hasn't. Folks ask her quite often or make comments to her in wanting to encourage me to a higher office. And my answer is always, I feel called to be in this position right now. That's where I feel called to be, and I don't see myself anywhere else but here. That doesn't mean that calling couldn't change in the future. I mean, 7, 8 years ago, I didn't see myself being called to this. So I'm never, I'm not going to secondhand or second guess God by any means and in what He may have planned. But I'm not planning anything. I know that, and so she will usually frequently say, "No, He is not seeking anything else. This is where He's supposed to be for this time right now that we know of."
Yeah. What's that old joke? If you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So, can you give the audience an example of a time when you put the needs of your constituents, roughly 70,000 of them, above your own interests?
Certainly. I think of a couple of different instances or situations, I guess, where I would have put my constituents in this legislative job over personal life. One of those, and it's not a specific instance because this happens very often, quite frankly, and that is when I put I have my own company. We have a little contracting company doing erosion control and grassing services. And so there are many days when I just literally don't do much or anything with that business because I'm called in a different direction to either be at a state park dedication like yesterday over in East Tennessee, another state park celebration today in my district this afternoon, like an economic development type meeting that I was in this morning. Gosh, and just anything and everything like that. Even just phone calls of talking to constituents or talking to government liaisons and folks like that to deal with a certain issue for a constituent. So I had almost all of those today, just in one day, and I got very little work of my paying job done. But sometimes that makes some late nights. You got to make up for that sometime, or you're out of business. So try to work it in when I can. The other instance, a much more specific instance, we had a bill. I can't remember if it was 2 years or 3 years ago that was improving our ethics laws. We had some issues with at least the public perception on a given topic. And so we had a bill that would prohibit each of us in the General Assembly from doing business with the state. And so that was kind of alarming to me because my business has been built over 25 and 30 years, both working for the private sector and the public sector. So I have done work for TDOT directly. I've done work for like the West Tennessee River Basin Authority, several state entities, sometimes a real small job, sometimes a large job. And so that was alarming because that was going to cut a chunk of my work out if I said we're not doing anything with a state entity from this point forward. So we got that amended to where if you're a current member, and this is, I've got a principle I'm sure you would agree with. It's not good to change the rules in the middle of the game. That's just not fair to the people playing the game. And so under that principle, several of us that had done business with the state over the years in various capacities got an amendment added to that excluded us as long as we disclose what entities we had done business with, state government, and which ones we might continue to do business with in the future. So even if you hadn't done business with one entity like TWRA, for example, if you listed them, then you could bid on jobs and do work for them in the future. And so that was the compromise. And so I did that. And in less than a year, I had an entity, and it happened to be TWRA, because I'd never done any work for them. They don't let projects, they don't put things out for bid in my realm that I ever see. So I didn't even think to list them. And in less than a year, there was a local project right here in my community that I was not able to bid on because of that ethics rule that we passed, and I did not list them. And so that was, a little bit of a costly sacrifice that affected my business and certainly my personal pocketbook as a result. So the former is the more common thing, when you're just meeting the needs and requirements of the job, and on a day-to-day basis, and kind of putting your other personal life and business life on hold.
Yeah, your time is no longer your own.
Right.
Well, good deal. So how do you balance the principles of servant leadership and with the need to make difficult decisions that sometimes aren't popular? I remember I sent an email a couple of years ago now to the entire General Assembly that a lot of them didn't like my response or my question, and they were, because it was very unpopular. But how do you balance that? I mean, because there are times when government does things that's not very popular, but is necessary. But that's counterbalanced by the times they do a lot of stuff that's very popular that's not necessary. So how do you?
No doubt. Well, I would say, and I hope this gets at your question, but I think it does. But the first thing that comes to mind on that is our oath of office. So our oath of office is to defend and protect the Constitution of the state of Tennessee and the United States of America, first and foremost. For me personally, I actually have to put the biblical principles first. And so any given decision that I'm up against, or policy, or vote, I'm looking at that first and foremost. Is there a biblical principle here that I've got to uphold? And certainly second to that is going to be the Constitution, and what our founders said about those things, what the overall purpose of the Constitution has for our society. And if it fits within, and usually those overlap, quite frankly, very, very nicely, as you well know. But if it doesn't fall under either one of those, then the decision-making process goes to the people. And what do the majority of the people want out of something? Because if it's not covered under either one of those, it's kind of flip a coin, really. It's whatever the public wants. Now, you have many uneducated people in our society that call us a democracy, which we are not. And because, as you well know, a democracy is mob rule. So the majority wins. And that's not what we have. We have a representative constitutional republic for a reason, so that you don't get folks that may have lost their education, lost their way over the years because of a lack of education about what got us here, what our Constitution literally says, and they then might dream up something that they want as a group and say, you are our representative, and therefore you have to do what we say. But that's not what we have. And so I have to go that route. That's my decision-making process, is, the Constitution. And if it's not covered under that, then certainly it's up to the people. And I'll tell you one issue that we're debating, in the last couple of years, that fits that is education. Under our Constitution, we're supposed to provide for a public education of our children, but it doesn't say how. So the how you deliver that is really up to the people. What is the most popular way of doing that? And as you know, we have continued to do the same thing for a long, long time, and we're getting worse and worse results, unfortunately. So I think it's time for a change, whatever that might be. And so I'm always looking for those ways to improve that. That's not something that personally I focus on as far as carrying legislation. I'm not the guy to carry education bills, but certainly supporting and promoting those principles of parents being in charge of their children's education. First and foremost, I mean, the parents are the ultimate responsible party. The government is not responsible for those kids. The parents are. So they should be involved. They should have the choices in front of them to provide the best education possible for their children that fits their family's needs, desires, and beliefs. And so that's one of those issues that we go to the public on and say, what do you think?
As always, folks, thank you for tuning in this week. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed part one of the discussion that Representative Todd and I had about servant leadership. Be sure and tune in next week for the conclusion. It is my desire to interview as many members of the General Assembly as possible who are willing to come on the show. There should be a few fan favorites that I'm quite sure that my fellow Tennesseans want to hear from as well. In addition to these elected officials, I'm going to be inviting other people in the conservative movement here in Tennessee and quite possibly some pastors to come on the show as well. And now for some wisdom from God's word. This week it comes to us from 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 2 and 3. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. Now, Representative Todd, he talked about being called to serve in the capacity he is in right now. He has been at this for 6 years now. What I want to highlight here for the listening and viewing audience is that we must find more people that feel called to serve as servant leaders, and not like the many selfish leaders we see occupying elected office today. People that believe they deserve the seat because of who their parents or grandparents were, or because they have the right last name. Those people generally look to serve in elected office for all the wrong reasons. That includes the people we elect to serve on the Republican Party State Executive Committee. Because as that supposedly august body demonstrated with their 41-7 vote this past Saturday, they are either unwilling or too afraid to take a stand in defense of their own bylaws, which many of the listeners already knew, of course, by their inaction earlier this year when they failed to hold the Sevier County GOP chairman accountable for his violation of the bylaws. By the Tennessee GOP State Executive Committee allowing the primary election to stand, in which there was evidence of Democrat crossover voting, as well as non-bona fide voting, which ultimately decided who won that election, the message the SEC sent to the entire state is that Democrats are now able to determine who wins GOP primary elections around the state. The SEC failed to enforce their own bylaws once again, meaning they aren't bylaws meant to govern the party. They're just mere suggestions. They are feckless and spineless. They are definitely not servant leaders. Well, at least 41 of them are not, along with Chairman Scott Golden. We can, no, we must do better, my fellow Tennesseans. So until next week, stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.